Welcome back to the program. We are joined today by Stanislav Krapivnik, a former US Army officer who now resides in Russia, which I guess gives you a very unique perspective of seeing both worlds, especially from the military perspective. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't just start residing in Russia. I went home.
Yeah.
Basically, uh, my parents moved me to the U.S. in '79. My father was a dissident, and then I came back with my family. My wife's from Republic of Georgia. It used to be just well, I guess yeah, it used to be the Soviet Republic of Georgia. We moved back 2010. Greenfield at an office in the Urals in Ekaterinburg for Cameron International.
Yeah, no, I'm guessing you've gone there as well to Georgia a bit. I was there back in when was it? May with or June with Ambassador Jack Matlock because he hadn't been
Mhm.
back in many years, and yeah, he was quite emotional, I think, about being back in Tbilisi because yeah, it's fascinating how much has changed though. In the well, it's been a few years, but nonetheless. However,
Oh yes,
sorry, you were
I,
saying.
yeah, I was a military advisor in Tbilisi in 2002. So after that, no, I've been back quite a few. I mean, I was back this summer. We're at my mother-in-law's, and then driving around the countryside. So, and I've been back quite a few times for work, for business, and then the last elections, I was there covering the elections and covering the first protests. I described the first protest that they had after the elections. It had all the energy of a easy listening jazz concert, not a metal concert, just a jazz concert. People are just like trying to pump them up, and everyone's like that was, and about 10:30 in the evening, they all went home. It's just the first couple protests are like that.
It doesn't feel completely organic in front of the
No.
parliament there. And we walked past there in Tbilisi as well. It's EU flags and signs in English, which they probably most of them can't read themselves. So it doesn't
Yeah.
have the, yeah, I guess organic feel.
Well, I'll give you another on that. I was there. I was covering for a couple of Russian news agencies, and then, but I have friends in the Georgian Georgia Dream Party at the top. So I was one of them. Pate Avaladze, he's been on my blog a lot. His brother-in-law is the mayor of Tbilisi. So the police knew us, and we just stayed to the side near the police filming because there's a lot of Russian liberals and Ukrainians in that mob who, at least some of them I know, recognize me. So I didn't go in there. With me was Shay Bowes. He's RT journalist. He's Irish. So unless you're watching RT English, most of them don't know who he is. So he went on in there. And, I call this liberal international. You had Islam or Jihad International, and then you have liberal international. It's these neoliberal groups from all over Europe and the US, and they go to whatever protest. I don't know who sponsored them. Maybe the Soros Foundations. Somebody sponsors them, obviously. And Shay walked up, and there was three Italians and a French guy holding a sign in English. They didn't even know it was in English. They didn't even bother reading their own sign. And he's talking to them, and they're like, "Oh, an Irish journalist!" Oh, because they're expecting it to be, some EU press. And he just starts talking to them. They're just spilling the beans. They're from this organization. He's like, "So you're Georgian Italians?" Like, no, we're Italians. But what are you doing here? And these people are middle age plus. They're not teenagers, young 20 somethings. They're professional protesters, like lifelong professional protesters. Like, oh, this organization paid for us to come here, and we're for liberal democracy, blah blah blah. And they get tossed around. They go from one protest, one country to another, and these people have no right to protest in that country. And I told Pate, your biggest mistakes is you should have set up checkpoints everywhere, check people's passports. If they're not Georgians, they have no right to protest. They're guests of the country. Georgians are their citizens. They have a right to protest. Everybody else, bye bye. But yeah, I'd say probably about 20-30% of the crowd was non-Georgians, maybe even more.
Yeah, this is how democracy took a strange turn. That is, everyone recognizes civil society needs a strong presence in any democracy, but suddenly civil society is supposed to be represented by international NGOs, financed by foreign governments, working with intelligence services. I mean, it becomes a comedy once one unpacks it, but few journalists would like to, though. But I was kind of nonetheless a bit
Yeah.
impressed by the Georgian government because in Europe you have to take one of two positions. Either you support NATO in all of their policies, no matter how mad they are in terms of expansion, war, boycott diplomacy. Otherwise, you're taking the side of Russia, and there's no room for you in polite society. But the Georgians kind of took the middle road, saying, "Well, we would like to join the EU, but we're not gonna become a frontline against the Russians." And in Europe, they don't know what to do about this because they just say the Georgians say this is our national interest. If we go anti-Russian, they're gonna crush us, so we would rather not. And the only response we seem to have is, "Oh, well, you're Putinists, and we have to topple you now." I mean, it's quite extraordinary, and they're still saying they want to be part of the EU. So it's you need a lot of uh, acrobatics by the journalists in order to try to fit Georgia into the narrative, where you can always have only one of these two positions. But
Well, there's a problem. The Georgians, in Russian, it's called putting your butt on two different stools. You sooner or later you're going to fall off. Or in Erdogan's case, in 3, 4, 5, 10 different stools. He's the master of juggling. Georgia, you know, so they're trying to play both sides. Well, they overplayed slightly too, because the NATO exercises, they ran to join the NATO exercises, even though, you know, it's stupid if you think about it, because the first the British, then the EU, then the Americans and the EU have all passed laws to bring democracy to Georgia and overthrow the Georgian Dream Party, specifically written in there, all three. But they're still trying to kiss up to them. Like, gentlemen, there is no forgiveness at this point. They will destroy you. They will destroy you personally. It's a black and white choice, because that's what the West has presented, a black and white choice. You either play with us or you play with them, but there's not going to be anything in between. But they ran to this NATO exercise. In fact, the parade of one armored vehicle from each country, the Georgians were at the front with the Georgian flag. Well, Vladimir Vladimirovich answered because there was a movement to try to calm things down with Georgia on a full scale and convince the Abkhazians to rejoin Georgia as a confederation, as an autonomous region, just like the Azerians are. The South Ossetians it's a dead end, because North Ossetia is across the border, and the South Ossetians will not rejoin Georgia under any circumstance. They want to unify the two provinces in one province in Russia. So, but the Abkhazians are a whole different entity. Plus, Russia's been supporting Abkhazians, doesn't really get much out of it, and they're a bone in the throat of future relations. So the move was to push the Abkhazians, well, not everybody, obviously, but to push the Abkhazians toward talks. And Moscow's pushing to resume the 3+1 talks, which was Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, plus Russia. The last time these talks were to be held was under Saakashvili. And Saakashvili agreed to them. Then Condoleezza Rice comes flying in on her broomstick, and we get the 2008 war. Because the last thing the Americans want is for peace to break out anywhere. God forbid that happens. You lose your leverage as soon as peace breaks out. You need the conflict, perpetual conflict. So that was the move. But when the Georgians went to this NATO conference and exercise, Putin signed a document giving a command to determine the borders, the Russia's southwestern borders, officially, between Russia, Georgia, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, which hasn't been done, which is the move that we're fully actually border-wise recognizing Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So that was a big step in the wrong direction for the Georgians. And like I said, they're trying to play both sides, but the point is, you alienate yourself from Moscow, the West will eat you alive, because there's no redeeming that. They've gone too far and they've insulted the sensibilities of Brussels too much. They will be destroyed. Ivanishvili will be destroyed. He's already had $2 billion worth of or euros worth of property confiscated. So this is a witch hunt. It's the same thing as Syria, because Assad tried to play up to the West at the end. He alienated Russia, Iran, China, trying to become legitimate again. And what we've got is we've got a country run by IGIL head choppers, and Assad's country has been destroyed. You can't do that. The West doesn't present you with the ability to play with both. It's either our sandbox or their sandbox. And that's what we saw in Ukraine from 2013. That's it. It's black and white as far as the West is concerned. You're either our vassal or you're the enemy.
Yeah, this was the deal for Yanukovych because he also he was reaching out to Europe because he thought he could diversify ties. Because if you put all your eggs in the Russian basket, you might become too dependent. So he thought if you act as a bridge, deal with both sides, then that would be ideal for not just for prosperity but also for political autonomy. And then in 2013 when he proposed the alternative that is how about the EU Ukraine Russia deal, so we would be a bridge and not a front line. The Europeans said in no uncertain terms, no, that's not going to happen. That's not your role. And when he failed to make the right choice, they made it for him. But that's nice segue into yeah the actual topic. We got a bit sidetracked, which is what is happening in Ukraine these days, because this war of attrition has been going on for 3.5 years now, and we're now starting to see essentially the loss of men and equipment translating into the loss of control over territory. So what do you see on the front lines in places like Pokrovsk or Kupiansk or Siversk?
Well, there hasn't been a war of attrition for 3.5 years. A war of attrition has really started about 2.5 years. The first portion where Russia destroyed the first Ukrainian army, Russia moved in fast, grabbed a lot more land than the Russian military could hold, and it was done on purpose. When combat started, if you look at the OSCE reports, Ukrainian shelling of Donetsk, Lugansk had gone up 5-6 fold. They had a 250,000 man army piled up on those borders. Their aim was to crush and exterminate the rebel territories. I mean, they didn't hide. They never hid. We don't need the people. We just want the territory. They flat out, all the major politicians would say that. Poroshenko's, our children will go to school. Their children will hide in basements. This was a speech he gave to the country. So everything's logged. I mean, this isn't some conspiracy theory or Moscow propaganda. This was logged. This was confirmed. And up to up to February 2022, everybody talked about the Nazis running all over Ukraine's military. Tons of articles on that. Everything got whitewashed, of course, instantly whitewashed. Everything disappears. Thankfully, off the internet, nothing really disappears. But when Moscow came in, of course, I was telling people since 2010, and people who should have listened, that this war was coming. So Ukraine had piled up 250,000 troops on the border, and flat out, Zelensky said, we're not going to abide by Minsk. This is ridiculous. It's never going to happen. And in fact, one of the last times they had a Minsk conference and Putin and Zelensky were there. Zelensky's just laughing as Putin's talking. I mean, there's absolutely no respect, nothing of the sort. The clown is in full effect. Well, Russia, the invasion was coming, considering how close Donetsk was to the front lines, which part of Donetsk was the front lines. The calculation was if they start full artillery assault before invasion, there's going to be massive casualties amongst the civilians. Plus, there were already 2 DRGs that were surrounded and being destroyed inside of Russia in Rostov Oblast. DRGs are the diversion and reconnaissance groups. There was almost 200 Ukrainians that were destroyed inside of Russia. People don't talk about that, but that was a fact. So they were effectively the special forces of the sort were already inside of Russia because the aim was not just the Donetsk, but it was to attack into Rostov and maybe head toward Voronezh to create a crisis inside of Russia. No, that's the Western that was the Western desire, NATO desire, create this crisis. So Russia struck first. Effectively, they did destroy the first Ukrainian army. It was not totally, but a very large chunk of it. The rest of it was destroyed in Kharkov Oblast when they started assaulting against Russian forces in Kharkov. Again, this isn't something that gets discussed in the West. The whole point again was to intimidate Kiev into signing a neutrality pact, and we know how that all went. That's why the forces that were coming toward Kiev was about 40,000 troops. They could never take a city of 2.5 million. It's physically impossible with that kind of force. Their job was to keep in place the Ukrainian army, which was about 100,000 men that were kept from being able to be moved from Kiev, just in case. Now, after the goodwill move out of the Kiev Oblast and out of the Sumy Oblast, and then we get the Bucha fake, we wind up with the Kiev offensive into Kharkov. You see, what they were doing, the Ukrainians are keeping. Just as a side note, it's a semi-secret. Well, it's not really a secret; it's an open secret. The first 3 months, the Russian military was not allowed to open fire on the Ukrainians until the Ukrainians opened fire on the Russian military. I've talked to quite a few guys that said, we're sitting there watching, they're getting ready for assault. We can't do anything because the rules of engagement are, because we're trying to do a peace negotiation. It was only after that the rules of engagement changed and they free fire engagement. Well, Kiev had put together an iron fist inside Kharkov. They were hiding them in parking lots, under residential buildings, in shopping centers, places like that. So knowing that Russia wasn't going to strike those areas. Well, the zone that was being kept under Russian control was very porous. I mean, it had strong points, but some of these strong points were up to 3 to 5 kilometers apart. And the Russian military at that point wasn't very effective at calling fire. For example, when calling fire, artillery fire, calling an artillery fire mission, it could take up to 2 hours, hour to 2 hours. Every general, every colonel wanted to sign off on it, and so on. It's extremely inefficient. It's one thing if you're attacking and the enemy's in a fixed position, you stop and you wait. It's bad, but you wait. But it's still doable. The other problem is when you're trying to hit an enemy, especially an enemy that's mobile, running in light columns. So they were flying columns. They were using light vehicles to go through between these hard points and start wreaking havoc internally. Well, right now it's less than 10. It's about 5-6 minutes to a fire mission, sometimes less than that. Everything's been reorganized. They got reorganized of that. In fact, it's about 10 minutes for an Iskander strike to be launched. From request to launch. Everything is very reorganized. The Russian army is good at learning. Sometimes you wind up learning on your own blood and mistakes, but the lessons get learned, and everything got reorganized in 2023. So when the problem for these light columns, though, they couldn't take any of the built-up areas. They lacked the firepower for it. So eventually that iron fist that Kiev was putting together in Kharkov, it left Kharkov and it went into the attack. The problem is the moment it went into the attack, it's now under the Russian air umbrella, it's under the Russian artillery umbrella, and it started taking casualties. So when they pushed the Russian military out and they pushed them, there was a decently hard fight for Krasny Liman and those areas, and they eventually pushed further back to the just inside Lugansk. They had lost that fist. And like a spring, you're pushing back. The Russian lines are getting shorter, the Ukrainian lines are getting longer, and the Ukrainian side is being attrited. Again, that's something that they don't talk about. So the counteroffensive, the Ukrainian offensive in Zaporozhye in 23, that was the second Ukrainian army. That was an army that was already being trained in Western countries. And it was planned by American generals, which says something about modern American generals. They get filtered not for quality of ability, but for quality of being able to kiss the arse of whoever pulls them up, because they're all political animals at this point. The second Ukrainian armies. This is when Russia went over on the defensive, active defense. The Soronikin line was created. I've been up and down in several places in that line. I mean, it's an impressive line. It was made for full-on NATO attack, not just Ukrainians. And it may still wind up being used if NATO really wants to go at it. but realistically, there's no way NATO could break through it either. Not with the standard of weapons that NATO presently has. Well, the Ukrainians, just to understand the concept, they took 120 square kilometers, which sounds a lot for people that don't really understand things, but that's 12 kilometers by 10 kilometers. That's not a very large patch. They left 80,000 corpses to take that. That this is World War One type uh, statistics. They take a small patch of land, really insignificant strategically. Period. A small bulge. They lost thousands upon thousands over one small village, Rabochina, which is basically three parallel streets. There's nothing left of that village, and it's on the low ground, and beside it is high ground from which the Russian side was firing down on them. And they lost about 80,000 men in that dead. I'm not talking about wounded. And a lot of the wounded were left out in the field to rot and to die and rot. And when Russian soldiers would go out there to try to pick up the wounded and pull them back in, the Ukrainians were using them as artillery targets and artillery traps. So after a couple strikes like that, they just started leaving them to die out there. That was when the attrition warfare actually started. And if the enemy wants to break his teeth on your line, you let him do that. Russia outguns the Ukrainians about 7-1 on artillery, has basic air superiority, has rocket superiority. The only thing Russia did not have anywhere close in 23 was drones, was FPV drones. The Ukrainians they had an advantage in those drones from the very beginning. They don't anymore, but they did then. And then they may have not been dropping grenades on them, but they were using for reconnaissance. They was allowing them much more mobility and eyes on target than the Russian military and especially the DNR, LNR forces had. There's videos are coming out of ambushes where they were just the drones are just directing the ambush, and the DNR guys were being destroyed because wherever they're hiding and moving, those spotter drones are just passing information on to the Ukrainian side. But everything's changed, and the attrition. What we're seeing is, attrition warfare is what it says it is. The kill ratio, it's not 36-1 as they say because of the body exchanges. I wish it was, but it isn't. But one of the reasons we give them 1,000, they give us back 30 or 40 is because we're advancing. By the way, when all of them, when the West says there's no advance, there is advance. That's why you have so few bodies, Russians, because Russia can recover its killed while the Ukrainians can't recover their kill. The actual kill ratio is somewhere around 7 to 8-1, not in favor of the Ukrainians. They're still losing much more. It's actually growing because the quality of soldiers is falling. The soldiers that they're moving in, the quality is sinking very quickly. The high class units, the experienced veteran units, the specialty Nazi battalions like Tornado or like Azov brigades, actually, by the time conflict started, they've been wiped out. A lot of these units are down to 20-30% combat efficiency, which means they're not combat efficient. Just to understand, a brigade at 30% is a battalion. A battalion at 30% is a company. A company at 30% is a platoon. So you're looking down to where you may have had 4,000 men combat effectives. You're down to maybe 1,000 men combat effectives. So yeah, it looks nice on the map because you still have the little same symbols of a brigade. But this is the same thing that Hitler went through when he was making divisions. Look how many divisions we have. But the general's like, yeah, but there's like 1 or 2 battalions in this division. That's all that's left. Or a brigade in this division. They're not divisions. They look like they have on the map, they have the icons of divisions. But the reality is, you're a threadbare army at this point. And that's what the Ukrainians have. Just understand, 1.8 million dead because it was 1.7 from the hack. And that was about 4 or 5 months ago. So they're around 1.8 million dead. You got to figure that there was actually an American news that slipped through. They're talking about prosthetic limbs and how bad there's a puff piece on prosthetics for Ukrainian invalids. And with the heavy losses of 1.2 million dead, and that was about 6 months before the hack. So here and there it slips through, but you got to figure at least 2-1 injured, because a lot of the injured are being left to die. So if you say 2-1 heavily injured, you're looking at about another 3 million men out of combat just for injuries. And about 1.7, 1.8 million dead, and out of which 400,000 are missing. And last week, the prosecutor general of Ukraine announced that they had opened 300,000 cases on desertions. That's basically the entire military of France and England combined that has deserted out of the Ukrainian military, has evaporated out. And then you get the POWs. I mean, you're talking massive, massive losses on the Ukrainian front, which is why it's now starting to actively collapse, because there's no men to hold the front line, let alone these endless counterattacks that Zelensky orders for his own ego and PR machine.
I guess that's why, quite logically, towards the end of wars, you do see when things fall apart, when the best soldiers are gone, when the equipment starts failing, when there's poor training, when there's a lot of desertions, increasing deaths. I mean, all of this just it worsens the situation much more, and you see in terms of performance how it's yeah, seems to be collapsing now compared to how they were, because they've been performing unexpectedly well over the past 3.5 years. I mean, it's been expected by many that they would have collapsed a long time ago, but you do see now that holding these things together, it doesn't seem like it's going to work. But because of this, though, there's this. I mean, at least for Europeans, the Americans have begun to check out a bit from this, had try to hand over the coming mess to the Europeans, but the Europeans seem to be willing to take responsibility with open arms. And but there's also this assumption that they can turn the tide with the tomahawk, or if they just get the right Wunderwaffe, then we can win this thing. But how do you see the possibility, both in terms of capabilities and intentions, of then I guess especially the Europeans, but also Trump is a bit of a wild card in terms of making a desperate intervention in some way, indirect or direct, to save the situation?
You kind of always wonder how the German population was pulled along by their nose, with that nose ring, septic ring, back in 44 and beginning of 45 with Wunderwaffen. This Wunderwaffen will definitely win the war. Okay, well, the next one will definitely win the war. When the Red Army's closing quickly from one side, the Western allies are moving in from the other side. Well, we're getting to see that. We're seeing that on the Ukrainian side, and we're seeing even more writ large on the EU side. Uh, you know, no wonder Waffen short of nuclear weapons is going to change anything on the battlefield. And if it goes to that, there won't be a Europe left. That's just that simple. And the thing is it doesn't take very many strikes in Europe to make Europe uninhabitable, because Europe is compact. The subcontinent of Eurasia is very compact. Now, Russian Europe is huge. I mean, if you look at the territory Russia controls, has always controlled from the Ural Mountains, well, we'll even call it to the Belarusian Polish border and down to the Caucasus. It's a huge area that is not that heavily populated compared to the rest of the European continent, subcontinent, depending on how you look at it. There, the fallout would be catastrophic. You do one strike in central Germany, and most of Germany is going to get that fallout. Just it's a small area, and it's well compact, and it goes. And the same thing goes with most of Europe. So we'll hope that there's enough sanity left in the EU, but I somehow doubt it. There's enough sanity left in the EU not to go down the route of absolute self-extermination. Now, long distance. The thing is, Glenn, the difference is in concept. I'm going to take a little detour on this to explain. Russia's biggest curse, you may say, with the West is we're white. You see, well, when Americans or Europeans arrive in China or in Africa or in India or in South America, what they see is people that don't look like them. And if they don't look like me, maybe they don't think like me. So maybe I need to figure out how they think. They come to Russia, they see blondes, blue-eyed, redheads. Oh, they're just like us, but we don't think like them. and that becomes an annoyance. And it has been for hundreds of years, thousands of years. We're Christian, but we're a different form of Christian. We're not Catholic. We're not the Latin Rite. We're Orthodox, and we do have a different concept and world outlook. So instead of understanding us, the Western approach has historically been, well, we're going to teach you how to live properly, how to be like us. Well, those damn stubborn Russians don't want to be like you. They don't want to learn. They refuse. So the next step in that evolution escalation is, well, we're going to take you by the sword and we're going to force you to be like us. But those damned Russians keep standing their ground and they keep winning. And, the first invasion of Russia was by the organized European invasion of Russia was by Stanislav Krapivnik, Prince of Krakow, and his Holy Roman Empire allies, various German states. They took Kiev, forced out Vladimir Krasnosonce right after he formed, Christianized Russia and formed a government. They couldn't hold those territories and eventually had to fall back. That was in 10,012 AD. And it's been nonstop since then. Everybody remembers Napoleon and Hitler. There's plenty of others that came. And that is growing as this, at least with the elites in the West, with this almost on a genetic level of hatred toward Russia. It has no logical ends to it, but it's there. I mean, look at the British. If you think about it, Russia and England should be absolutely natural allies. They're both at the ends of either end of Europe. They have no desire for Europe to be unified because whenever Europe gets unified, they're looking in one direction or another. It's not good for either. England is a maritime empire. Russia is a land empire. You would think that they would be natural allies, but no. 300 years of psychopathic hatred toward Russia and the Great Game, which was the funny part is historical archives that were opened up from imperial times. Russia wasn't playing the Great Game. For the most part, the Russian government didn't even know there was a Great Game being played because Russia never had any intention on India, never had any intention on Afghanistan. When Russia went into Central Asia, it went into Central Asia because of slavery. Because the same reason it went into Chechnya, because the Chechens were raiding slaves, selling them to the Turks. Russia went in, counter-raided for about 100-something years, and then Nicholas I was offered, by the generals, we need to settle this out and end this. And they ended the slavery that the Chechens were selling. And it wasn't just Russians. They were raiding Georgians. They were raiding other Muslim territories because that was their number one. That was the number one industry. Well, then you get the next group over, the next Khaganate over that was raiding. And Russia keeps going further and further and further, the Khiva and on to stop the slave raiding of Russian territories. But the British took it as the Great Game. So you get this psychopathic hatred that has absolutely no rationale in it. But that's what we're dealing with. And the escalation problem is, for the Orthodox, war is always a sin. There is no just war. St. Augustine's just war concept was never accepted by the church until the church split. And then it was accepted by the Catholic side, but it was never accepted by the Orthodox side. So for us, war is always a sin. It can be a much worse sin by not going to fight. That's a different concept. Sometimes you have to fight because to stop something much more evil. But war is always viewed as evil, which is why Russia has always been on the side that's trying to calm everybody down. When Peter the Great was getting ready to spring his trap in Poltava against Charles, the soon not to be great, he was writing him letters. Let's stop this. Let's go back to the old borders and we'll just stop this. Stop this idiocy. Well, Charles didn't feel like that, and Charles wound up bringing Sweden down to being a second-rate power after that. And the same thing happened World War I. Nicholas II was running around trying to calm everybody, talk everybody off the ledge, but everybody wanted to jump off that ledge for the great 2 months glory war. Yeah, that didn't work out too well. Well, you have the same thing right now with Putin. It goes back to the same thing. But the thing is where the West goes incremental step by step, Russia is more like a spring that's getting pushed down, pushed down, pushed down. But all that energy and hatred and anger just gets built up. And when it lashes out, it doesn't do the incremental, it does one big escalation. Uh, at, Believe me, at this point, most of the population would love to see Kiev burnt to a crisp, and maybe a war with NATO because of the anger level that these strikes are having. They're having the exact opposite effect of what the West thinks it's going to do. The West thinks it's going to demoralize Russian population. It doesn't work that way with Russians. It works in the opposite direction. It just grows the anger. There's more people signing up to fight. The anger, even the people that would have sided with the West, the liberal elites, they're still there, those that didn't flee, they're no longer looking at the West as something to side with. The anger's now reaching them. So whatever natural allies Brussels had within Russia, they're expanding them very, very quickly and losing them for generations to come. So that's the situation. So with Pokrovsk, Pokrovsk is going to fall. Obviously enough, it's surrounded. There's just it's Russia's going slow to save its own troops. There's no reason to rush this. They're not going anywhere. Every day they're running less and less on food. They're running less and less on ammunition. Why speed along and lose soldiers when you can just trade shells and drones for men? These guys, Pokrovsk as the city, or Krasnoarmeysk, is almost 90% in Russian hands. Mirograd is about 20-30%, but it's going very slowly just because they're not in a hurry. They're just leveling it, and anywhere that the Ukrainians might be hiding. There is a channel open that's about 1.8 kilometers wide. And the reason you always leave a corridor open in the encirclement is morale. As long as there's some route out, the enemy is always going to be on the brink of running for it. Once you cut them off fully, they only have one or two choices: fight to the end or surrender. And the problem is the Ukrainians are Russians. And as Russians, nobody in Russia thought this was going to be an easy war because we're fighting ourselves. To Russia, this is a civil war. We're fighting ourselves, and we're stubborn as hell. We don't like surrendering. We don't like stepping back. We'll fight to the end just out of spite. And that's what we're fighting. We're fighting ourselves. Most European countries wouldn't be able to handle this. I mean, just flat out, they wouldn't. They don't have the morale. They never have had the morale. The Germans, if you read what the German accounts from the first days of Barbarossa, there was one good account where a column of Germans came under fire from one Maxim machine gun. They eventually killed the two machine gunners. Well, when they killed one assistant machine gunner, when they got the second guy, the first guy, when he died, the second guy covered him up with a greatcoat, returned to fire the machine gun. And what shocked the Germans is the second guy didn't have legs. His legs had been torn off previously. So he'd been bandaged up, and he's sitting there, and he's just covering for the other parts of the Red Army that were moving back. And he killed quite a few of the Germans in that machine gun. It was a suicide stand. It wasn't like a bungee charge like the Japanese like. Well, we'll stand to the end. We're just going to make sure we take as many of the enemy with us. That's the mentality in Russia, and that's what we're fighting with the Ukrainians, because those are Russians. They're Central Eastern Ukrainians who are Russians, ethnically Russians, culturally Russians. So it's a hard fight. It's an absolutely hard fight. There are videos that came out with a group of Ukrainian soldiers that were surrounding the woods. The Russian side is screaming for them to surrender, and they scream back, "We're Russians. We don't surrender." And there you go. Yeah, they were destroyed because they wouldn't surrender. There's the gist of the issue. So the Europeans are very misreading what's going on. Very much misreading what's going on.
Yeah, this is one of my great concerns, what you referred about the escalation, because I think NATO and versus the Russians talk past each other in terms of signaling how one goes up the escalation ladder, because NATO is kind of almost the king of incrementalism. That is the small
Mm-hmm.
salami tactics. We saw this with NATO expansion. If there's some opposition, we'll call it the partnership for peace. Instead of doing NATO expansion, we'll just prepare them slowly for membership, and then we take the step. Same with missile defense. We'll just put 10 interceptor missiles, and then suddenly, a few years down the road, it's a few thousand. So, and the same with Russia. It began in the war now, a proxy war with Ukraine. It's begun some maybe some Abrams. How about the HIMARS system, long-range artillery, F-16s? This is World War III. Or will we get across this? And now, of course, we have American troops firing American missiles deep into Russia, guided by American missiles, targets picked by American generals. So it's kind of, so we gone down this path, but at every step we look towards the Russians and they say, well, they're not retaliating yet, so we can poke a bit more. We can climb a little bit further up the ladder. I guess my great concern is, as you suggested, that if the Russians do not escalate the way we do, that is, you used the word spring, and I thought that was interesting because Putin used the same word in a 2014 speech. He was making the point that they were pushing us and pushing us till the spring was completely pushed to the back, and then we come out charging. And this was kind of the context of taking back Crimea. So in the West or in NATO countries, we looked towards Crimea, and everyone was shocked that this came out of the blue. It was such an overreaction. But again, it's because we do the small little steps, and then if nothing happened, then anything would seem like an overreaction if you just do the small steps. But again, I guess that's my conclusion, is the delusion of escalation control, that we can move up and down this ladder and make sure that the Russians do, yeah, that we can predict their responses. I think this is where things can and might go very bad in the not so distant future. But yeah, my last question though was about how the new targeting seems to be going. That is, energy infrastructure seems to be now the main target in this war of attrition. That is, Ukraine and NATO seem determined to knock out Russian energy, be it striking refineries or stopping ships or sanctioning Russian partners, however it could be done. But also Russia is stepping up in a big way in terms of, I guess, turning out the lights in Ukraine for, yeah, a variety of reasons, military, commercial. But how do you see this war on, I guess, energy playing out?
Well, I'll add before I go into that. I'll add two things. There's a Russian saying, when Ivan takes a long time to stand up, but when he stands, blood flows in rivers. There is a
Can I say
insanity.
one quick? Otto von Bismarck, he had something similar. It's very easy to get the Russian bear out of its cave, but you can't put it back in. Something
That was
along
going
those
to be my
lines.
second one, as a matter of fact. Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
sorry.
Bismarck had another one. The Russian is slow to mount, but he gallops very quickly. And that is that the concept too is war is a sin. You forced us to fight. Now we're going to just destroy you because you forced us into the sin. That is a cultural approach. If we have to do this, we're going to do this as hard and bloody as possible. So you don't ever want to do this to us again, to force us into this fight. And that is the Russian mentality. And in enforcing, so realistically speaking, right now, the only thing that's saving the West from a massive, massive escalation is Putin. Because if the people had their right, the generals had their right, there would be fire raging from London to Warsaw at this point. That's the level of the anger that's already built up. There's only a certain amount that Vladimir Vladimirovich can do to keep this pot from boiling over. It's the exact opposite effect. The West keeps having these fantasies. Oh, we'll remove Vladimir Vladimirovich and we'll get another Yeltsin, and then we'll be king of the hill and we'll feast on Russia for another 100 years. Well, there's always that chance, of course, but I wouldn't be a betting man on that. More likely, what you're going to get is somebody that's going to burn most of Europe down as a revenge. So that it'll be one of those where you remember Vladimir Vladimirovich very fondly because that was the good times, and now come the bad times. You're not going to get a liberal reincarnation of the Yeltsin era. It's never going to happen, not at least for the next 3 to 4 generations. That's been in they've had their vaccine against that, and Russia just got back on its legs, and the anger is very strong right now. So the energy infrastructure. Well, I've got bad news for people. Horrible news. There are no lines for gas or gasoline, petrol, whatever you want to call it. There are no lines for it. I've got a channel, and I asked my subscribers. I've got about 11,000 people on my Telegram channel, a Russian language one, and asked them who's seen lines, who's seen gas stations out in two provinces. Two people noticed one gas station apiece out, and another one gas station didn't have E92, which is the low level gasoline, which is high end gasoline for the United States. E93 is basically the high end expensive stuff in the U.S. Um, as an interesting side, well, and these were small gas stations that were private. They weren't part of these big chains. And just to understand, they're last in line to get fuel. So the big chains like Lukoil, they're of course going to do their own gas stations first, and then whatever's left over gets sold to these small mom and pop outfits. There is no shortages. Fuel prices have gone up, but they've been going up steadily anyways for the last 6, 7 years. Unfortunately, wish that wasn't the case, but that is inflation is everywhere in the world, fiat currencies. But no, there are no massive. If you've ever been to a biorefinery at a refinery, I spent about 15 years in oil and gas services as a director in supply chain. So I'm pretty familiar with the infrastructure and how all this works. Well, the cracking process, which modern cracking process was invented by Shumail, a Russian engineer back under Imperial Russia. The modern cracking process is, modern refineries are huge, 10, 15 kilometers in length. What you're seeing hit is not the refinery itself per se. What you're seeing for these big pictures of these beautiful flames, because look what we're doing. What you're really seeing is oil storage facilities being hit. These are the big round storage facilities. The roof on it goes up and down by volume to keep the pressure on there. They burn really, really well, and they're easy to replace. The problem is when you hit the piping, all the vessels are pressurized with cutoff valves that are computer monitored. So you hit one of them, and you may get a little bit of a flame out until the computers switch off, close the valves on either side, and there's no more fuel going through this, and nothing to burn. It doesn't give you the big PR picture. And those are relatively small. Some of the vessels can actually be a bit difficult to replace because they're huge. We've had, I was on a construction project, EPC project. I was director of supply chain on the project for an Italian company. We were expanding production at the Moscow refinery, and some of those vessels were 70 meters long, almost 80 meters long. But that's exception. The majority are relatively small, and they can be replaced relatively quickly. And they don't give you the PR picture. So most of the hits are against the big oil storage facilities. Again, they look nice for PR, but they're really not the big damage. And this isn't some gigantic amount of oil that's burned up. And they're easily replaced, too, because this is not a very high technology piece of infrastructure. From the Russian side, it was admitted about 14% oil refining capacity had been taken down. It goes down, it goes back up. It goes down, it goes back up because it gets retooled and put back up. Part of the oil refining facility that's down right now is a switch to winter fuels. Happens twice a year, winter, summer fuels. And that's being claimed as, oh, look what we've done. We've knocked out their oil capacity, refining capacity, which is a lie. It's down because it's retooling for the winter brands of diesel, the winter brands of gasoline or petro. Like I said, it happens twice a year. It happens in any northern country. What they're missing is Russia is a net exporter of not oil, just oil, not just gas. It is the bigger exporter of diesel. I think before the conflict started, Russia was responsible for 70% of the world's diesel exports. And it's also a big exporter of gasoline. Russia fed Europe. It wasn't just fuels. I mean, we're talking steel products, titanium products, aluminum, automobile parts that were put together in Germany, raw paper, fertilizers, food. wheat, rice, fish, pork, and so on and so on. Russia was the base commodity supplier for most of Europe. So it wasn't just about energy being cut off. Europe really cut itself off from everything. Germany had problems with paper because Russia sold the big rolls of raw paper and then bought from Germany cardboard and printer paper and everything else. Well, once the Germans sanctioned that, the Russian industry just turned around and started producing themselves. One of my friends was IT director in the company that now was only producing raw paper for Germany and buying the cardboard. Now they're producing 80% of Russia's cardboard. That's markets that the Europeans will never ever get back again. It's gone. That market's just closed. So when you're hitting those kinds of infrastructures, you're hitting fungible commodities. Russia, Putin ordered back in August a freeze on all fuel exports out of Russia. I mean, I'm talking about gasoline and diesel, which lowers the commodity volumes worldwide. Well, who's the biggest importer of fuel in the world? I'm talking about gasoline, diesel. Europe is, and so it's a hit on its own self. It's an own goal. The same thing when there were a lot of European commentators were celebrating that Russia had droughts in the south. There was a couple $1 billion worth of wheat that was destroyed. Well, Russia's not going to starve. Russia's the third largest producer of wheat. It produces twice as or almost 3 times more wheat than the U.S. does, and is the biggest exporter of wheat in the world. Russia's not going to starve, but the commodity prices are going to be hit because there's less going on in the commodity market. Who's the biggest importer? Europe is. It's another own goal. So from the Russian side, there have not been major issues, and there's now various steps that are being taken to protect these facilities. There's not enough anti-aircraft systems to go around everywhere. They're being mass produced, obviously, but Russia's a very big place. Plus, Russia's supplying Iran. Plus, Russia may be supplying Venezuela. Don't know, but there's a lot of rumor going around for that. So there's other things that are being done. Nettings that's being put up. Various other local systems are being put up. Even dirigibles, Zeppelins, that are going to be holding nets are starting to be put up because the drones that you're dealing with are Cessna-style drones, airplane-type drones. You're not dealing with FPV drones, so they really can't fly under this netting if it goes up. Additionally, to defend the facilities, last week, Putin authorized a formation of volunteer reserve units. These are people who they're not able to go to the front for one reason or another, but they can volunteer and work as a home defense on like 1 month on, 1 month a year, just rotation groups. So they'll defend the perimeters or patrol the perimeters of key infrastructure locations, just in case of diversionary groups. So there are things being taken. Now, from the Russian side, when you're destroying the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, there's several reasons for this. One, obviously, you're hampering logistics. Two, you're hampering, while there's no major manufacturing left in Ukraine, you're hampering repair shops. Three, and the big reason is you're getting rid of the people. You're getting rid of the civilian population. They can't survive in the cities, particularly Kharkov, Sumy, cities that are going to be liberated sooner than later. You don't want the civilians there. If they don't have heating, they don't have lights, they don't have water, they're going to leave. They're going to self-exile out of those cities. Then the battlefield becomes much less complicated. The enemy troops may still be there, but they don't have a human shield to hide behind. By the way, a lot of the explosions you see in daily in Ukrainian cities of civilian buildings, that's because they are using those civilians as human shields, and they're putting their anti-aircraft systems between buildings. So the missiles go up. If they intercept something above the city, obviously falls down. And even if they don't intercept anything, sooner or later run out of fuel, and they fall down. And when they're over a big city, obviously they're going to land on something. Gravity, is still in effect. If you look at Moscow, there are Panzer systems inside the city, which are small rocket and mostly autocannons. But on the outside of the city is your rings of S-300s, S-400s, S-500 systems, so that nothing falls on top of the cities. The people aren't used as human shields. The Ukrainians are using their own civilians as human shields. so that okay, they won't strike if we're right beside a kindergarten, and that does it does hamper the Russian side because they're trying very hard to avoid civilian casualties. Um, you get massive 300, 400 drones strike in Ukraine. You get three, four civilians killed. They're all screaming about it. They're killing three, four, five civilians on the Russian side every day. Uh, you go on the outskirts of Moscow, here and there, you'll see buildings with burned out areas where Ukrainian drones are striking the building, and they're all residential buildings. They can't hit government and key infrastructure. They just go after residentials to kill civilians. I've been in Gorlovka. Uh, I've been up and down those areas, and you go. I was recording a report for RT in Gorlovka. There was a Eastern Gorlovka is more or less. It's a little bit dangerous, occasional drones, but more or less you can go through it. Western Gorlovka is the front line, and there's literally like all European cities, except for cities like Moscow. It ends at one street, and after that, there's a field, and that's it. The city's over, and we're on that road of death. Lots of burned out cars from drone strikes. The artillery will hit the road, so you can't speed down that road, and then the drones will take out the cars. We went over there, and this market got hit by a 155 round. There was an American Paladin riding around somewhere out there. They hit the market at 8 in the morning. Thankfully, it hadn't been opened yet. The guy selling cookies was lying behind me when I was reporting. His corpse is still there. His wife almost lost both her legs. She was evacuated out. Nobody's coming for the body because there's still an artillery duel and there's drones hovering about. And we were stupid or psych, so silent enough. We got to go out there, and I'm doing a report on that off my own camera. And we parked our cars inside some of the yards, and there's 10-story, 12-story buildings. And as you're walking through and you're looking around, and there's burned out apartments here, there, here, there. Those are drones. Those are the FPV drones that the Ukrainians are launching. They're going into people's windows to kill civilians. I mean, they know they're hit. I mean, they're looking at them as they're flying in. They're picking whatever target they can randomly. As opposed to, and they do that here inside of Russia because that's the only thing they're masters on trying to kill civilians. On the Russian side, it's all military targets. A lot of times, or if civilians are hit, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It happens. Literally collateral damage. They're not the targets. But once you get the utilities out of the way, the civilians leave, and that's what Ukraine doesn't want. It wants the civilians in Kharkov. It wants the civilians in Sumy, because when the war comes to those areas and the operations start hitting those areas, they want civilians in the way. It's good PR, and it slows the Russian forces down. Russia's doing the opposite, getting rid of the civilians from that area, getting them to leave in mass.
Yeah, I've seen, well, I remember in December of last year, you had a lot of report in Ukrainian media. This was a big topic among the politicians, but it also appeared in Kiev Post and all these others that between 100 and 200,000 have moved back into the regions which are under Russian control, which, of course, well, it was framed mostly as an economic decision, but, well, yeah, let's be honest, I guess if they hated Russia with all their hearts, they would not have moved into the territories, I guess, controlled by Russia. So there is, I think the story here is a bit more complicated than what we get served in our media. Just a quick comment on the sanctions though, because as a European, it's been painful for me to watch this kind of self-harm because I used to work in Moscow as a professor in 2018, 19, and 20. And the department I worked for researched almost exclusively on Russia's pivot to the east, that is diversifying its economic connectivity away from the west and towards the east, essentially sanction proofing itself since 2014. And when in 2022 we imposed all these sanctions on Russia, I said on day one that this is a horrible idea for us because Russia can diversify away from us. Because I was working with that, I know that they were preparing for this. But while they can diversify away from us, we can't diversify away from the Russians. So it's a losing proposition. Why would you cut off your ties if it's going to hurt us more? And at that time, I was told, well, you're saying this because you're a Putinist. I mean, you're undermining trust in sanctions, and this is the only thing. And now, of course, we go 3.5 years into this. The European economies are going down the toilet, and even now that we're watching the Russians and the Chinese agree on this power of Siberia 2, all this Arctic energy, which is supposed to fuel our industry, is going to Asia instead. It's almost celebrated as, oh, look, we liberated ourselves. It's away from all these markets. It's quite painful to see this horrible self-harm. The whole concept is setting your own house on fire and hoping that somehow it might spread to the Russian house as well. It's no, it doesn't bode well for, I guess, our common continent, as we're all Europeans here, though. But
Yeah, in Russian it's called cutting off your nose to spite your mother.
yeah, that's pretty much
You
where we
know,
are.
with the power of Siberia too, and this is a very important point. Power of Siberia one was from Eastern Siberian uh, oil and gas fields, all going down to China. Power of Siberia two are Western Siberian gas fields. Those were Nord Stream 1 and 2. China, now it's going to take 4 to 5 years to get the pipe going. You know, Mongolia is going to be booming because it's now going to get cheap energy plus transmission fees. There is no, it's the end for Europe. You could put up the Nord Stream 2 right now, and in 4 years it'll be empty because the Chinese have bought up all of those gas fields, the entire volume. You'd have to develop new gas fields for the Europeans, and the Chinese have long-term contracts, and that's it. In 3 4 years, as soon as that Power Siberia 2 pipeline comes online, it's over. All of that goes east. None of it goes west anymore. That's it. And that's something a lot of Europeans don't understand. They think that, as soon as this is over, we'll just come back into Russia. Well, no. In fact, Chevron and Exxon wanted to come back into Russia, and they wanted to buddy up with Rosneft again. And they were told by the government, straight by Vladimir Vladimirovich, that they're not preferred. We don't want them back. Basically, we don't need them. And just as the amount of oil in Russia. I was working on a project. I was a supply chain director for Eurasia Halliburton. We were supplying in 2014. So we were supplying the infrastructure for a joint Rosneft Exxon drill north of Arkhangelsk in this one location that they're in the seas above that. So in Russian, it's birthplace. I can't think of the English word for it, but oil field. We'll just call it an oil field. So they were drilling a wildcat well, and Obama said leave. Well, Exxon talked them into let us just drill a wildcat well. Well, for people who don't know what a wildcat well is, geologists figure out presumably where oil could be, right? Where it's bobbled up from underneath the crust, where it's gathered because of the geological features. But maybe there's oil here, but you don't know until you put a hole in the ground. It's wildcat because you go, oh, okay, let's do it here. Oh, nothing there. Let's do it there. And you start doing this incremental pop a hole here, pop a hole there until you find the oil deposit. Or maybe there is no oil deposit. So they drilled. They drilled 2,000 meters under the subsoil. So you got the water level and the subsoil. You can only drill during the summer months because the ice is broken. There's constant ice there. And Rosneft didn't have marine technologies. Rosneft brought in the marine technology. They drilled 2,000 meters, which is nothing for a modern well. Sweet light crude. In that one mother lode, there was about, they figured there was about $100 billion worth of oil. And there were multiple patches like that in the seas north of Arkhangelsk. It's estimated about $1 trillion worth of oil. Well, 10% would have gone to Exxon, so the U.S. screwed itself out of $100 billion over a 10-year period, just off of that area for development. Whoops. Force de jure, that contract's ripped up, and then Rosneft starts investing in its own marine technology development. So you don't need Exxon anymore because they were the shortcut. They had the technology ready. So Russia has massive amounts of everything. It's still mostly untapped, realistically speaking. And there's an oil pipeline that goes to China right now. Right now, just to how far Trump has helped advance world peace through not intentionally, of course, but there's nothing like insulting Modi and overthrowing the Bangladesh government and getting involved in Indian local elections to spite Modi. So right now there is the Chinese, Russian-Chinese oil pipeline going into northern China, and the deals are being signed to extend that Chinese, Russian-Chinese pipeline to India through Bangladesh, by the way, with the new government, Bangladesh, because they still need energy. And guaranteed, once that's accomplished, there's going to be a separate line that's going to run into Southeast Asia. And they're doing the same thing in the end with the gas pipeline. Gas pipelines are run down to India also. So you're making an infrastructure to which the U.S. has absolutely no answer to because it's not sea-based. It's all land-based now. It's out of the hands of the U.S. Most the U.S. can do is try to overthrow governments along the line. And there aren't that many of them. They're not going to overthrow the Indians. They're not going to overthrow the Chinese. And even if they try to overthrow the Bangladeshi again, and nobody's going to let them get away with it once there's gas lines. Russia has signed a contract with Afghanistan, with the Taliban, to run LNG right now by truck, by two different routes. Today it's truck, tomorrow it's a pipeline. So Russia has fully turned east, and which is not good news for the West because one, there's generational anger now. I mean, the West has lost Russia for at least 2 generations and possibly 3 generations. Now, the elites were pulled into by these sanctions, screaming and kicking, pulled away from Europe because the elites wanted to be part of Europe. And a lot of the elites, minor elites, we can even say, the liberal upper middle class, lower upper class. But they have been. The massive Russophobia that went through, it's convinced people that they really do hate us. And then the middle class has watched all of this, obviously, and they've turned east or turned inwards. And Russia suddenly remembered that Russia is a civilizational state and is a huge, great civilizational state, something they quite literally forgot. The end of the Soviet Union, the collapse, the 90s, the 2000s, people, they started to, and some started to even loathe themselves. A lot of them had no respect for themselves or the country, and all of that started turning around in the late 2000s. But the SMO, Special Military Operation, has accelerated that immensely. That process, the swing back toward, well, we don't need them. We're a great country on our own. We don't need to do like the West. The West needs to do like us. It's a pendulum in Russian history that goes back and forth, and it's swinging very hard back away from that. And the SMO has been a very prime instrument in doing that and forcing the elites out of that. And suddenly people are going, well, we don't need to take our money out of Russia. We can just invest it in Russia and we'll get a better return. And it's better for us. Oh, and people like us then. So, maybe I should leave a legacy for my country instead of the yacht I was going to buy in France and sit there. So it's a mentality change. And that's one of the reasons this is also taking a long time. There's many levels just outside the battlefield. It's an economic war of attrition. It's a cultural war of attrition. And it's quite literally a political war of attrition because Russia is looking at the West and going, the longer we take, the more Europe is going to crash. Because all those problems in Europe, in European countries, not all of them, obviously, but the majority of the big ones, they're coming to the forefront. Look at England. England is a police state, open air gulag. England, there was a great statistics. How many people were arrested for posting things on the internet? In Russia, it was 424. In the UK, it was 12,000. And when you count that the UK has a third of the population of Russia, it'd be like 36,000 if it was proportional per capita. And you're looking at the same processes going on in all of Europe. Europe, the quote liberal democracy, is showing its teeth. It's an autocratic police state infrastructure, and it's taken the velvet gloves off on its own people. So it's a matter of how long can we pull this before the Europeans crash in on themselves.
Well, On the you mentioned the pendulum swing. What is interesting though with Russia ever since, well, at least Peter the Great, who tried to Europeanize Russia, was that modernization. Again, all countries have to go through modernization, but modernization in Russia was always much in the tradition of Peter the Great, framed as Europeanizing Russia, that making it more Western. What is interesting this time around, though, in terms of modernizing, is that for the first time, modernization means Russia can look east as well. They never had this before with the Chinese, especially, but also other partners in the east. So, no, well,
Yep.
on the energy going east, I'm very happy for the Mongolians and the Asians, but as a European, I can't help but to be
Right,
somewhat
right.
bitter that we are, yeah, ruining, well, that we're not seeing how militarizing new dividing lines in the continent has, yeah, exercise in self-harm. Anyways, Stanislav, thank you so much for taking the time. I very much appreciate it. And
Thank you.
where can people find you?
I am on YouTube at Mr. Slavic Man. That's Slavic with a K, not a C. I am on X, Stas Krapivnik. I am on Telegram. I've got two Telegram channels. Stas Tуда и Обратно is the Russian channel, and Stas was there is the English language channel. Excuse me. Or they can drop me an email. So at stas.krapivnik at yandex.ru.
Excellent. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.